I came from a startup background back in the 2012 timeframe, and my husband and I started a company which I exited in 2016 and was then approached by Boeing to come join them. And for me, I'd never worked at a corporate, and I really was not a fan of corporate life or corporates in general. I was based here in London, and I thought I'll try it for 6 months and, get it on the CV and then leave. But when I joined Boeing, I was very lucky to find myself as part of our venture business. And really that venture business was very focused on the US at that time. And for me, I was really passionate about startups here in the UK and out across the world, and making sure that they got the same platform as those in the US. So how do we make sure that our companies are getting that platform, that profile, to be able to reach those very large opportunities out around the world? So for me, that was when I started this idea of how do we begin to do some sort of corporate access or accelerator program for startups here in the UK, but into Boeing and into the wider aerospace ecosystem. That was back in 2015. So what we were really focused on in the initial stages when we first launched the program was really focused on how do we get more early stage companies into the Boeing supply chain. As we have evolved, so we've now been running the program for 5 years. So as that has evolved, we have begun to think more about how can startups support the Boeing ecosystem outside of just the normal things that you would think about. So not just aircraft related technologies, but also as an enterprise of 160,000 people, we need lots of things. So for example, last year, we also invested into human resources related technologies. So not just things that go on aircraft, but think about the whole organisation and our wider supply chain. It's very clear that in aerospace, it's a duopoly. There are two big players in aerospace. So getting access to the Boeing company and our ecosystem can be a real game changer for early stage companies. So I think we've seen everywhere, haven't we, over the last few years that AI has just really exploded, and we see it, in every market, everywhere. From an aerospace perspective, where we're seeing real benefits from AI already are things like predictive maintenance or flight planning. Super important. We're seeing, we've seen quite a lot of press recently about turbulence. So turbulence modelling, we're using AI. Thinking,
And how is that helping?
Well, what that's doing is actually giving our pilots a better line of sight to what's coming, or being able to predict what might be coming. So one of our companies is a Japan-based startup called Nabla Mobility, and their expertise is around that turbulence modelling and flight planning. So thinking about it in, from a safety perspective is one element, but also being able to use that from a sustainability perspective. So can we fly a more fuel efficient flight route, for example, and using AI to help us plan things like that. So I think it has lots of implications, not necessarily just in the immediate thing that you're looking at. As we think about it in the longer term, though, we are, coming to this real change in air mobility generally. And we're all very excited and looking forward to air taxis flying. So when we begin to think about that and that kind of, aerial robotics, that's where it gets really exciting in the future. Beginning to think about the design of those aircraft, first off, I think there's a huge role for AI in that as well. But then also thinking about it longer term to all of these use cases that none of us have yet considered. So it's a really great way to start to simulate some of what the world will look like when we're all moving around aerially and not just on the ground, and what the implications of that might be, and also what new opportunities that's going to open up for us and new markets. So we are looking for companies. Yeah. So here in the UK, we've got a company called Seize.ai, which is an aerial robotics company. They actually fly for National Grid, monitoring the electricity network here in the UK to help with maintenance. So they're a really exciting company. Actually have one of the most advanced beyond visual line of sight authorities here in the UK, which really shows that they're breaking the barrier in terms of moving us forward in terms of aerial robotics here in the UK, which is super exciting. And then we have companies from the UAE, from Japan, from France, from Germany, literally all over the world. Our focus is predominantly, though not exclusively, outside the United States. And what we're looking for are those early stage companies, so usually the seed, pre-seed stage companies, maybe some pre-A's in there, depending on the scenario. And the other thing that we're really passionate about as a team is female-founded teams. So we're very proud to say that last year 50% of the companies that we invested in were female-founded teams, and that's something that from a tech perspective we know that there isn't great representation there. Aerospace is even worse than the general tech environment in terms of representation of women. So for us it was something that was really important to us to actually make a stand on and start to really push the boundaries on what's possible in that space. So we're looking at those pre-seed and seed stage. So if they're, and it's the Boeing company, we have lots of different routes in terms of investment. So it depends on what is the most appropriate fit for us. But basically how it works is we meet with those companies, and those that we think have something special. We mightn't be able to put a finger on it immediately, but we might feel like that there's definitely something here that we know we could take advantage of. That probably makes sense for it to come in through the Aerospace Xelerated program aspect, which is like an accelerator program. We run that now on a challenge-based model where we bring in founders in a small group and actually put them through our acceleration process, where we help expose them to all of the key kind of stakeholders at the Boeing company and try to help them find that product market fit really quickly. When we do that, the first step that we take is £100,000 sterling check that we put in. And that's, from our perspective, that's a nominal amount of money that allows us to do a very light due diligence and get them over the hurdle of becoming a Boeing supplier. In aerospace, becoming a supplier is a huge challenge in and of itself. And that's something that we have found is by just removing that barrier immediately and having you as an official Boeing supplier, it opens a lot of other opportunities for conversations and opportunities to test and try things. So that's the first step that we take. But then we do have the ability to follow on investing as well. And we can do that direct from Boeing, or we can do that through our partners. Exactly, but we also have a number of funds that the Boeing company has invested in. So the main one being AEI Horizon X as our main funding partner that we work very, very closely with, and they're based in the United States. It's hugely important, and obviously aerospace contributes 2% to that overall carbon emission. So for us, it's really important to help drive that future, forward and make sure that we are responsible in that field. And we've got a Chief Sustainability Officer, Brian Moran, who you will see is out across the world trying to gather everyone together, because there's a reality which is one company cannot fix it on its own, and we have to do that as a collective. And I think in all of our innovation work, that's the message, is none of this we can do by ourselves. We are an ecosystem and we have to work together in order to be able to achieve any of those missions that we want to achieve. Yeah, so for us it's using our position. So there's no question that when you come with a Boeing badge, it opens a lot of doors. We were talking earlier about access, and I think that's the most important thing that we can do. There are a lot of calls that I can make from the Boeing company to get our startups through the door. And a lot of the time that's all it takes. We can provide an ability to give them that profile, to be able to put them on a world stage and make sure that people are actually seeing them. I think for startups based around the world in ecosystems that are maybe less well developed, that's a huge part of the challenge, is how do I just get seen? How do I get into the right room? And that's one of the things that we can really help with. On the other side, we also have a huge bank of technical expertise at the Boeing company. Some of the greatest minds in the world, are in the back room at Boeing, inventing and creating. So being able to expose our startups to those people, to really test them, test their thinking from a technical perspective, and really help push them forward. a lot of our technical experts get super excited about getting to work with our startups because they can move significantly faster than we can. So that's where you get this, bridging that divide between the corporate innovation space and these, startups on the outside that can move really quickly but maybe don't have access to the same level of resource that we do. What we're trying to do is ensure that we're providing all of the resource that we have available to us to the best and brightest tech startups that we can find across the world. Really simple. So we run office hours every week. So if you just go on to xelerated.aero, our Aerospace Xelerated website, you'll see there's an option to book office hours with us. Someone from the team will meet with you. I think the more specific you can be about the help that you need, the easier it is for us to help you. So for example, if you've done your homework and said, it's this individual within Boeing that I need to talk to, well, that's really simple for me then just to drop an email, make an introduction and make that happen. Whenever you're less specific and say, I need to talk to someone that does this thing over here, 150,000 people I have to search through to try and find you the right person. So the more specific you can be, the better. And I think also the more open you can be, the better. So a lot of people come to us with assumptions about what Boeing has or how Boeing works. And I would say 9 times out of 10, they're incorrect. So just being open to the fact that you might have something, but we may not need it. We may need something very different. We have a company that came to us actually from Canada, and they had a solution and in the autonomy space, and that was great. When we introduced them to some of our business colleagues, our colleagues in Canada, they actually came up and said, well, we don't need what you're trying to sell us today, but we have this problem over here. Could you help us with that? And within 18 months, not only had they provided the solution, but they are now the de facto solution for the Boeing company. That's a company called Pegasus Imagery, based in Canada, who are doing all of the de-icing solutions on our Chinook. So it just shows you that openness and the willingness to have those conversations and say, okay, we might have an idea about what we want to do, but actually here's the opportunity that's immediately at hand. Can we solve that? And if the answer is yes, then you're building that pipeline of future opportunity as well, aren't you? We've made a commitment, in all seriousness, we did make a commitment that any female-founded team that contacts the program, we will sit down with. And we will sit down and have a real conversation with, because we find that men oversell themselves and women undersell themselves. So what we want to do is ensure that we're getting a fair view of what we're seeing. So when we have those female founders come and talk to us, that we can really do a deep dive into how can we help? Where might that fit? And we do make an extra effort around that, which is what has led to 50% of our teams being female founded last year. But outside of that, I think it is having done your homework. It's all the basics that everyone tells you. Know what you're coming into, have done your homework around who's already in the space, what we're already doing in that space. I mean, a lot of that is very publicly available. It's very easy for founders to go and take a look and work out what we're doing, and come into us with some really solid ideas about here's the path that we could take, here are the people in the company that we could help. Because it's very easy for us then to run that down and say, okay, that will be a fit or that won't. And for us, it's as much the exercise of helping that founder understand quickly if we don't need it, rather than them wasting the next 3 years trying to sell something to us that we just don't need. So, I think that's as much of a success as, making the investment and doing the thing, is getting the no quickly. And that's something that we can help also accelerate through the program. 28% is the ethnic minority. Now, I have a challenge with that, in that some of the program activity that we do is based in other markets. So what becomes minority then? How do we measure minority? So for example, if we are doing a program in India,
because there's a lot of aerospace over there.
How do we classify minority? So that becomes a real challenge to us in order to, because we could go and do 2 programs in India and, 80% of our portfolio would be, in UK terms, diverse. But is that real? If we've just done a program. So it's a really hard thing whenever you're trying to do that at a global scale to look at that. What do we qualify that as? But it is something that we are, that we're always really mindful of. And I think it's more about not how many from a particular bucket are we pulling people, but are we reducing the barriers for everyone? Is the playing field level for everyone? So that's something that we spend a lot of time considering, talking about, trying to ensure that we are actively talking to our colleagues in those countries, in those places where we see fewer people from. And every year we look at who have we talked to this year? Where have they come from? Okay, who have we not talked to? Why is that? And that's, I think, is the bigger question about having that, kind of rolling approach, which is what are we missing each year? Who are we not hearing from? Or who are we not connecting with, and why? And if we can continue to get better at that, obviously I think that will over time level up the playing field.